Welcome, dear all, to another episode of Homeomitra Vartalaap. Today, we have with us here Nyema Hermiston, who is an autism expert, and she has been treating children with autism since quite many years. She has done a lot of research on autism, and so she's going to share with us. This would be kind of a mini masterclass for the laymen, for the general population, as well as for aspiring homeopaths who want to treat autism. So we are going to have a lot of information exchange about autism, the causes, the treatment, her research, as well as a very nice book that she has written, which deals with a lot of details of autism, which every common man must know. So over to you, Naima. Please tell us something more about yourself if I missed anything and about autism for all of us.
Well, thank you for your kind words. I actually have to confess that the focus of my work is more on autism risk factors. So the reason for that is because when we as homeopaths try to treat autism, there are so many risk factors that are listed and there are so many causes, and what I can tell you now, they can go back to preconception. So as homeopaths, we've got this sea of symptoms. We've got stressful parents. The child is out of control. Everybody's miserable. And they come into your clinic. And we all know what that feels like. It's like, where do I start? And how can I get some improvement in this child? And I would have to call myself a clinical homeopath. So I do look at the physical symptoms a lot. I have found that treating the mental emotional sphere in autism can be helpful when there is a striking symptom, like a terror of something in particular. But generally, the autism children have got a very similar range of symptoms, like they're irritable, they may not sleep, they can't communicate, they're really frustrated, their diet is terrible. So we've got all these symptoms that I have found that it's very difficult to prescribe on because, where do you start? And so what that led me to do was to start thinking, well, let's have a look at the research. Let's find out what the causes of the risk factors of autism are. Actually, that started when I was doing a science degree at Middlesex University in London in homeopathy. And I decided to do my major project on autism. So I was forced to look at all these research papers. And it was as big a surprise to me as anybody that I found all this material. The researchers, they can make a mouse autistic. They know exactly what to do. And I would have to say that the key thing that really, really helped me understand what's going on in an autistic child is that here, I don't know if you've heard about the organic acid tests. They are very expensive and not everyone can afford them, which makes them not ideal. But when they are done, there are these two researchers in America, William Shaw, they're both PhDs, and William Walsh. And they've been testing children with neurological disorders and adults for decades. And they both say with 100% confidence that they can see the profile of an autistic child because they've all got oxidative stress. They say 98%. And that the 2% that haven't, they say it could be a lab error. They're that confident. And they've literally done like over 500,000 tests on these children. So they can tell by looking at an organic acid profile if this child is under oxidative stress. And any child who has oxidative stress is not going to be a well child. So that really, when you think about that homeopathically, what that immediately tells me is that you're talking about brain inflammation. And I'm thinking, belladonna, it really helps me to understand what I'm treating, page 1 of the organon, so my specialty area really is in autism risk factors and the range of them and when you put them I've got this diagram in some of my presentations that I use, and I call it the perfect storm. And it's all the cascade of risk factors, and put it all together in a genetically vulnerable child. And this is what's happening now.
So currently, from your clinical experience, what is the current state of children who are now being diagnosed with autism? What are the kind of symptoms they have been having, and what is the presentation in those children? What is the incidence of that kind of disease right now? Because back when we used to see, we would not see many autistic cases.
Well, the incidence is escalating at a terrifying rate. And even the CDC, the Centers of Disease Control in America, which is like where they collate all the international data, it's 1 in 30 or 1 in 31 of autism, and then in the additional neurological disorders, it's 1 in 6. So it's a terrifying statistic. It would be called an epidemic if it was an infectious disease. So the presentations, I mean, they vary from children who are completely nonverbal and unable to toilet themselves, kind of thing, to being what is popularly now known as neurodivergent. So they can live a normal life with great effort, and sometimes they can be especially talented at certain things, but it's a lot of work to get them to live in the normal world, the real world, and everything in between. Sometimes it's very hard from a homeopathic perspective to really understand what the symptom, to interpret the symptoms, because if you're a child who's got a brain that understands what is going on, and you can't express anything and nobody understands you, then you're going to get really frustrated, angry, maybe physical, especially as they get older. They're more likely to be physically aggressive, but that might not be an innate state. That might be a normal reaction to what they're actually experiencing. So this is the great challenge when you're a practitioner trying to work out what needs to be treated.
So intermittently, what I would do is I would come to your book that you have written, and what motivated you to write this book. What I've seen the pre-podcast talk, what we discussed, you have done a lot of reading, you've done a lot of research paper work, and you have come to certain conclusion, especially about the risk factors of autism. So then I would like to know what motivated you to write a book, because already there is so much information available in the world about autism.
I know there's so much about autism. There's so many books on autism, but it's all around treatment. I purchased every book that I could find on autism risk factors and how to prevent autism, and there are three books that I could find. All the rest are on treatment and management and diet and everything. But my motivation was it was an accident, actually. The motivation was when I saw all these studies about the deficiencies that these children have. And so I just learned so much about the physiological dynamics of what's inside, what creates an autistic child. And there's no fast way or concise way to put this, but I just started recording all the studies. So I've got hundreds and hundreds of studies on just vitamin D deficiency. So just to go back a step, so what causes the oxidative stress is environmental toxicity. So that can be environmental pollution, that can be normal insecticides and pesticides, and we all kind of know about, the agricultural problems, the additives in food, but it's just gotten too much for people. So what that does is it consumes the available nutrients in order to, the body needs those nutrients to counterbalance these toxic effects. And then you've got oxidative stress, right? So when we test a child, then we actually do this spectrophotometry, which gives us a graph of all the toxic metals, all the nutritional elements, and also the vitamins and minerals. So the vitamins, minerals, and toxic elements. And with many of them, almost all of them are deficient in zinc, deficient in vitamin D. They may be low in vitamin C because their bodies are so depleted, so their brains are depleted. And I've got in the book, I have a lot of the graphs to demonstrate that. So this is the thing. As a homeopath, what do you do once you know that the chances of a child with autism, that them being deficient in vitamin D is kind of so high? And you know, we're in Australia, we get more sun than anyone could wish for, and you're the same in India. And also the darker your skin is, the more sun you need. But more children are more likely to spend more time indoors in Australia anyway. And we know that vitamin D is much more than just a vitamin for strong bones and you know, calcium levels. So this is a huge thing. And so I think if there's one vitamin, I would say to give a child with autism, it would be vitamin D. So, and this is the question homeopathically, is that can we address that homeopathically? And, you know, my understanding of what the homeopathic remedies do is if someone has iron deficiency anemia, they need iron. That's my understanding. But if someone has plenty of iron and they're showing anemic symptoms, then the homeopathic remedies can help their metabolism to rearrange the way their body functions so that they get the uptake of iron that they need. But in the testing that we do, we see these frank deficiencies of zinc, vitamin D, iodine. Iodine's huge. And we know that iodine is so essential for normal neurological development. So, and the list goes on. And I have to say, it was a huge surprise when I was looking at all the papers, all these research papers. It's like, oh, wow, there's this risk factor and that risk factor. And then I put it all together. And that's not even talking about the medications and vaccines and things like that. So it just became, the information overwhelmed me completely. So I started to try and collate it. And then that led to the writing the book. Because I thought parents have to know this. And I felt pretty strongly about it. So I wrote it for parents, but it's turning out that practitioners are also finding it quite informative. And I just cannot believe, I've been in practice for over 30 years, and I cannot believe that I stumbled on this information and that so many people, good practitioners, are not aware of it. And yeah, so this is the biomedical area of autism that we're talking about. And homeopathy, you would say, absolutely is a part of biomedical treatment for children.
What is surprising to me is that there are only 3 books which mention prevention or the risk factors for autism, whereas a plethora of books are available for treatment of autism. So,
Yes, yes. Well, these children started appearing in our clinics and everyone was scrambling around. It's like, what on earth's going on? This is like in the mid to late 90s, I guess. It's like, what's going on? These children, and quite often, I say it in the book, that the parents knew more about autism than I did at that time, because they're dealing with the child every day, and we're seeing these kids, and it's like, oh, well, we'll just give them a remedy. And I don't know about you, but I find treating autism really, really challenging. It's not a straight, smooth path at all. So we all need a lot of different elements to understand. But so all the books that first came out were about managing and dealing with autism, and I don't know. I cannot explain it, but I just saw that there's nothing on the causes. There are no books. I I've been asking people, if you find a book or find information about the causes of autism, please let me know. But I haven't seen another book, and this one is particularly, both practitioners and parents can benefit from it, but it was aimed at parents. We don't have time for me to convince whoever needs to know about causes of autism and public health authorities and things. It's too urgent. So I'm trying to educate parents. I want parents to know about this stuff. And if what parent wouldn't want to know what's the best thing for their child? And, I presented this information to the every few years in Australia, we have this National Homeopathic Conference. And so I presented it, and it was like, it was it was shocking. It shocked everybody. And there's nothing fancy there either, but it's like, how did we not know this? And if it was kind of an accident. If I hadn't done the science degree, and if I hadn't chosen autism as the topic, I wouldn't have known about it. And yeah, but there's a lot of interest, obviously, because people really want to know that. Yeah. So I've reached the conclusion that if enough risk factors can be addressed before conception or during pregnancy, then the autism incidence could be less. That's my bold assumption.
Now, talking about risk factor, there has been a recent controversy around a medicine called as acetaminophen. If you could sort of share something about that, share your views, and how bad is it?
Okay, so this is the thing about risk factors. If you're a pregnant woman and do you know about the MTHFR gene with the metabolism of vitamin
Methylation,
B9?
yes, yes,
Okay.
about methylation,
So
yes.
let's say you have that gene, and let's say you've got a very poor diet, and let's say you drink a bit too much alcohol, or, so let's say you've got a cluster of risk factors already, right? And then someone takes paracetamol, um, then that increases the risk. So you can't say because you took paracetamol, you're going to have an autistic child. And actually, I do think that the health of the mother is so crucial as to how well she can metabolize the paracetamol. But the real risk of paracetamol is giving it to children after vaccinations. Because this is in many vaccination clinics, there is there's a protocol. After your first vaccine, you take a dose of paracetamol straight away. Then 4 hours later, you have another dose. So within 8 hours of a vaccine, a child has had 3 doses, like an 8-week-old baby has had 3 doses of paracetamol. So to explain why that happens, actually, it's quite a convoluted story, which I do explain in simple terms in the book. But basically, there's a protein in the gut called glutathione. So this is the most powerful antioxidant we have in our bodies. And what paracetamol does is it inhibits the action of glutathione. So on one hand, you're giving a child a vaccine, and on the other hand, you're giving it paracetamol, which is going to disable the body's ability to metabolize that vaccine. So the researchers I mentioned before, actually, one of them says the reason for the autism epidemic is not the vaccines. I'm not making comments about vaccines themselves, but they're saying that the reason for it is not the vaccines, it's the paracetamol that's given with the vaccines. And I don't know of any studies that are done on that. And this is the first time I've announced this to the world on a podcast. But that's the research. And so it's not black and white. You can't say paracetamol is dangerous, but in the wrong amount for the wrong person at the wrong time, then the risk is there. And the research is compelling, And if I can just argue about the studies, they quoted one study in Sweden. But in my book, I quote meta-analyses, which is much more than one study. So I do think that when you're going to come out with bold statements, that you need to be able to, back it up. But I read this morning that in 2021, a group of 91 researchers tabled their concern about paracetamol because there's so much research about the damaging effects of it. So there are anyone who wants to take a look, there's endless amounts of research on the harmful effects of paracetamol. And it's also strongly associated with allergies. It affects the immune system in that way that it can be associated with allergies when children have taken it. There's lots of research about that too.
I'm now trying to think both from a parent's point of view who would have an autistic child. I'm just trying to think because I've seen those patients. My wife treats children with autism with homeopathy, and I have seen those cases first and I've observed in her clinic. It is challenging to treat them, but more so in the absence of the right knowledge as to the causative factors, the aggravating factors about what homeopathy can do, how long you need to take homeopathy, and what you should expect, how you should deal with autistic children. So yes, definitely I find this in that sense very useful, particularly for parents, although it is overwhelming for them, but that information is necessary. From the homeopath's point of view, when you said about the biomedical model, I realized that it's not just going to be about the totality of symptoms, the ailments from the modalities, concomitants, locations, sensation, but also about the causative factors, which are like, Hahnemann said.
And also obstacles to cure. So I think that what doing this research, it's like it grabbed me. Like I couldn't, once I saw it there, I could not do nothing. I had to, make sense of it for myself. And then when you put it all together, you think it's no surprise that kids are turning out autistic, because of what their bodies are having to deal with. And so as a homeopath, we have to look right back into the history. And one of them, the other fact, see, paracetamol is just one of the medications. It's one of four or three main medications. The other one is antibiotics. There's a very strong association with the use of antibiotics and autism. There's also a very strong association with SSRIs, the antidepressants, and even women who take it before conception and during conception. It's a very strong association. So if you think, it's very easy to imagine one woman having antibiotics, because they had got strep B, that they might be taking antidepressants throughout their pregnancy, and then they get a headache and they have some paracetamol. That's your sitting duck. So as homeopaths, we need to understand once we know what the risk factors are, we know what to look for. And Tina Smits, I don't know if you know Tina Smits' work. So he's a Dutch homeopath who who died some years ago, and he had done a work on the cease therapy, CEACE. I can't quite remember exactly what that all means, but it's about autism expression and what the triggers are. So he would look back into the history and find that, maybe someone had taken antidepressants or paracetamol or vaccines, one of many things. Yeah.
I just got a question. When you talked about genetic profiling for children, whether genetic profiling of the mother would also help in identifying whether there is a risk factor for her taking an antibiotic or paracetamol or any other medicine, SSRI for that matter, if it would enhance the risk of autism, if there is a sort of a precursor, pre-test which can be done.
Mm. So the situation with genetic, there's a lot of opinions about autism is mainly genetically generated, um, and that's all. So there's nothing you can do about it. But one of the reasons for that is about 90% of the research funding goes on the genetic profiling. And it's been the genetic profile of an autistic tendency has been quite refined to quite a fine point now, which is great. But what can we do about it? It's like, and often you will find if you look in the family history, you might detect, one of the Uncle Bill had tantrums, or there were odd sort of members of the family, so you can often see the genetic tendency there in the family. But the other thing is when you've got anything like autoimmune disease, cancer, very severe allergies, those are all risk factors for um, sort of part of the picture, because you don't usually see an autistic child in isolation. If you look through the family history, you will find some chronic illness, some allergy, another autistic member of the family. So, yeah, so, but I believe that that it's the triggers, the genetic, the epigenetics is like the expression of those genes are triggered by the environmental insults that children are experiencing these days.
Before we conclude the podcast with your take home message, we are going to leave a link to your book in the podcast description, as well as details to contact you, because there will be some questions which will be very personal in nature and we may not be able to take up on the podcast. So if anyone wishes to contact Naima, please feel free to, using the description in the YouTube video. And yes, coming towards the final part, if you could share a take home message each for parents who are having children suffering from autism, and for the homeopathic doctors aspiring or already treating children with autism.
Gosh. The take home message would be I think, to make sure that you have enough zinc, vitamin D, iodine, and essential fatty acids. That the work to avoid autism starts before conception and during pregnancy. Really, it does. And the other thing is to avoid as many toxic environmental factors, which I list in the book. And I've made it very simple, very easy for parents to grapple with, and just say start with one thing at a time. And air pollution is one of the biggest problems, because nobody can escape it. And I have been to India a number of times, and I can remember being in Delhi and my lungs hurt. So, we as adults have a better chance of dealing with that than a young child. So one of the options is you get an air filter. So there are solutions to most of the problems. We can't change air pollution, not on it by ourselves anyway, but we can mitigate the impacts. But it's really a constellation. It's not just one thing. And the worst thing a parent can hear is, oh, if you gave your child Panadol, then, that's why they were autistic. That just is not true. But the Panadol or the paracetamol could be a part of the triggers, the cluster of triggers that are there. And certainly, I would say for parents vaccinating their children, avoid paracetamol for sure. That's a huge one. And make sure that they are eating natural food. It's sort of an impossible question, but I hope that's helped.
For the homeopathic doctors aspiring and both treating children with autism?
Okay, um, so once you learn the risk factors, you've got a list of the obstacles to cure, potential obstacles to cure, because then you can identify. And it's quite clearly listed: toxic elements, nutrients, and other factors, and medications. Those are kind of the categories. So it's very easy to be familiar. There's nothing unusual in there. So once you're aware of those factors, and then you can attach them to the patient, and then you can find out the timeline of when the problem started, that gives you a much it kind of takes away that kind of walking through a maze here, because there are so many possibilities. And the other thing is that there are with all the autistic symptoms of irritability and insomnia and temper tantrums and poor appetite, and in amongst all that, sometimes you do see the essence of the child. Maybe they love horses, or they have a particular skill or something, and that's what we're looking for to treat homeopathically. But having said that, if you've got a child with a high-pitched scream, you're going to look at the brain inflammation remedies, that kind of thing. So there's still a lot we can do with just homeopathy, but personally, I don't think that's quite enough. Although I know that there have been some staggering successes with just homeopathy and autism, but there's not enough of those practitioners to treat all the autistic children, so we have to work with other factors as well.
This one is clear. Just out of my own curiosity, are you yourself having any training modules who train homeopathic doctors, or homeopaths all around the world to help them, become proficient in treating autism?
Oh, there are a number of people doing that, but around the world, I'm not. I mean, my book is my contribution to the world of autism, and I do, because I don't want to make my sound like blowing my own trumpet, but there really isn't, that, to my knowledge, any guide for parents anywhere. Most of the books on autism are written for practitioners, not parents. But it just so happens that this stuff is quite interesting for practitioners as well. And it's an easy read. You could read it in a day. It's very simple, very easily laid out, and every single thing is referenced with, a lot of scientific, research papers. So it doesn't have to be all that complicated, but we just need some focus. And so I think, to be honest, if someone's mystified about autism, reading this book could help. There's nothing like treating autistic kids to get the real picture. But there is what's her name, Ren Lloyd in England. She's doing autism training, and there's a lovely doctor in India. Can't remember his name. I've got some of his papers in my archives. He does a clinic. There's a clinic in Chennai, I'm pretty sure. And I'm sure there are lots of Indian doctors doing extremely well with autism using homeopathy. And yeah.
That was a indeed, informational as well as insightful conversation we had with you. And maybe in the future, we can sort of have a conversation over the ongoing or the latest updates about autism, the new genetic,
Sure.
the new tests which have come up, or there is a new causative factor. I'm sure you will also be having that in the editions of your book.
Yeah. Look, yeah, as I said, there's not enough. One person can't communicate with all the people that need the information. So a book is, one way of doing that. I would say it was such a labor of love. It's like, and I had no idea it was going to happen, But when I think about it, when I look back on my writing about, when was it? Maybe 10, 15 years ago, my husband and I, John Gamble, he's a naturopath homeopath as well. We're both trained in naturopathy and homeopathy. And we wrote this book called Treat Your Child Yourself. And so when I look back, I've always had this passion about keeping medications away from children. And now that's sort of starting to make even more sense. Gosh, I hope I made sense, Kaya.
Absolutely, trust me. I have that background. Although I'm not much into practice since quite some time, but I do have the background in psychiatry. So part of what we learned in psychiatry was also about autism. I have treated a few cases on my own, and I've been observing the cases that my wife has been treating. So I can tell you that this was helpful. But like I said, that to get better depth of knowledge, books are definitely useful. And I would recommend that people who want to get into that depth, they must read those books. And one of
Yes.
those books written are by
Yeah.
Nyema. So we'll be leaving a link to the website and all the entire details in the description, as well as we'll be embedding them into the podcast video as well.